We start this process by taking a quick look at what the long-running process actually is of onboarding a physician. So the story here is that we would perform some recruiting activities through marketing and so forth until we obtain a physician who's interested in joining our network. At that time, we pick up where exactly in the process we start to engage the physician in capturing his or her data. Our objective is to capture all the data that you see here. Actually, if we were to look at the PNM data model, it's more significant than this. There's many different objects that data needs to be captured and verified within to actually onboard a physician. Process looks something like this. We're really going to pick it up here, where all the steps prior to that are mostly marketing activities. So we would have, at this point, gotten to the physician a portal login so that the physician can then execute an Omniscript in this case that captures the data that is relevant for this particular physician. So what typically happens there is that the physician lands on a page that asks them whether or not they're able to provide a CAQH number. CAQH number is access to a third-party repository that collects and maintains physician credential data. So in this case, we're using an example where providing that CAQH number retrieves some of the data about the physician, which would include some of the records regarding how they have identified their specialties, where they've been certified within various states, where they were educated, because we want to validate that they actually are a physician and have attended the schools that they told us, how they're licensed throughout the various states that they practice in, and then any employment history. Again, this is a Omniscript that captures all that data, and upon completion of this Omniscript, then we have triggered the orchestration process. So in this case, we are starting again right there. Either go, as you would expect, into work items and see the work items that have been created for us and assigned to us. And that would take us to the first step within the particular stage that we're in. So that we're in the stage of verifying the provider. We are also managing behind the scenes a set of cases that we wanted to capture for the management of this activity. This is the first step. If we take a look before we go into the details of this step at what our flow actually looks like, we'll see here that the flow starts because we have a provider application record that's been created from that Omniscript. The initial process kicks off and goes into a series of background steps within the first stage because there's a bit of data model that needs to be set up prior to engaging further with any type of interactive steps for the user. We want to review the data, and that's what this step is doing in an interactive mode, because prior to sending this off for pure verification of this information, we want to review it and see that it's as accurate as possible, because we're going to incur costs, either internal costs with our departments that do the verification, or potentially external costs around external certification vendors. So what this is just illustrating is the idea that we might, or we do support the idea of external verification, what we call delegated verification when a hospital verifies their physicians for us, internal verification, or the path that we're going to take, which is hybrid verification. Part of this is going to be done internally, part of this is going to be done externally, and once all those steps are complete, then it'll proceed forward. We would look at any sanctions or any disciplinary actions that have taken place against a physician, and if there were any, we'd go to committee review. But what we're happy path is going to take us to is a stage of contracting. Contracting will then engage with us in a series of steps to collect or to create the data necessary for contract generation and creation. And then the last step will just be some of the downstream activities that need to occur to onboard the provider. So if we go back to where we first start to engage in an interactive step, we're here at the collect data from provider, review the collected data. So recall that during the Omniscript, they provide us a significant amount of data, and now we want to review it. What you see here is the work guide embedded inside of a case object, and notice here this is a flex card. So we've embedded a flex card inside of the screen flow within the orchestrator step. Now, this one is high. What this does is it gives us a degree of, I'll say, real estate density, data density that we would not otherwise have with the standard components within inside of Lightning Flow. So what we've done here is to kind of leverage the ability to embed a Lightning Web component inside of a screen flow, and in this case, that Lightning Web component is a flex card. Notice that this one's blue, or these are green, meaning that the data is complete, at least to our subsequent data verification. However, the work history seems to be missing an employment type for this particular type of, or for this particular record. By clicking into what is actually a data grid element within inside of the flex card, it will launch for that row that I clicked on an Omniscript. A very simple Omniscript in this case, but the idea here being is that we're able to capture the missing data, and when we update that, then it goes and corrects the work history item, basically turning it green, telling us that all of these elements clear our initial data verification, data validation steps. So at this point, I could ask for more data if there's a reason for that, and that would just simply take us to the step that would ask for more data. Otherwise, data is complete. We're going to move this forward. At this point, it takes that data, completes the stage, of course, sends this on to the next stage, which is actually internal verification. So this is going to use some standard ScreenFlow capabilities to iterate through, in this case, all of the employment records. So we're first going to go in and see all those employment records. We're going to verify those, that we contacted the previous employer, verified they worked at this particular hospital from those dates, and then that's going to take us into verifying their education history as well. Now, these two items were issued out in parallel. It just happens that this user's part of both queues, so we see now that we have another work item available to us. This then takes us into that verification step for the purposes of those education records. We've included some things that are, just inherently part of flows, like attaching documents and so forth, if we needed to upload a document. But we're just going to go ahead and verify all these records, similar to what we did with the work history records. And it shows that we can step through these things in iteration or in sequence based upon the X number of items that were provided. Now at this point, it's updated the case status. We'll see that this case is closed. It moved the process forward, and if I go to the parent case, what we'll see is that it subsequently created an additional case, which is for the purposes of contracting, because what we just finished was the credentialing step. Now we're in the contracting phase of this process. Drilling into that case, then it likewise has a work guide component on the case page. And now what it's asking for us to do is select the reimbursement type. So reimbursements are the way that we're going to pay these physicians. What we've set up here is the ability to select a template and then copy all those records using Flow into the object that is the contract object. So by selecting this record from the choices of templates, what that's actually doing is copying a series of records, 7 different types of agreements, and up to 11 lines of data. If we take a quick look at the contract, I can illustrate what occurred in the background. So in this particular case, we specified the different contract agreements payment agreement types. So those were the 7 that we saw. And then if we drill into any of these, what you're going to see is these are all the lines that it copied into the contract on how we're going to pay for certain services. So that's what happened in this first step of this interactive screen flow. Now, the next step actually starts to leverage other Omni Studio components. So what we see here is a very simple flex card that allows for me to launch a modal Omniscript. And this Omniscript is much more sophisticated than the one we saw a moment ago. Here we're able to pick what template, document template, we want to use. The idea of document templates are that a customer could maintain different types of templates. Maybe they have different contracts based upon the type of provider. Cardiologist templates might be different than urology templates. In this case, we just have one single template that addresses provider contracts. When we move on to the next step within the Omniscript, and notice that we're in a modal pop-up within launched from a step within inside of a Lightning Flow screen flow. This approach addresses the issue that can occur if you simply try to embed an Omniscript inside of a screen flow. That issue being user experience. You would end up with potentially multiple next buttons based upon whether the user is trying to execute the Omniscript or whether the user is ready to move on to the next flow step. So in this case, that manner in which we do that allows for the user to have clarity on what they're supposed to do. These are conditional components within inside of the contract that's going to be generated. So some of those I answer yes, others no. These are additional clauses that would be terms that I would add to the contract. Again, this is part of Omni Studio, Omniscripts, document generation. What we noticed is that we automatically selected certain clauses based upon the type of physician, this physician's cardiologist, as well as the state that that physician practices in, which is California. So in that case, when we look at the generated document, what we're going to see are some additional clauses specific to the physician type as well as where the physician practices. This is now running the client-side document generation. Contract's been generated with some of the default text. If we scroll down here, you'll see some of this highlighted or color-coded text. These were sections of the document that were driven by those radio buttons, the conditional selections that I made. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, what we'll see as well is some other highlighted sections that were based upon those clauses that we identified. So here's the cardiology clause, here's the practicing in California clauses. And then ultimately when we get down here, you'll see those payment agreement items that were associated with this contract. So this comprises the type of contract that would be sent to the physician for his or her approval. Notice this moved us forward automatically to the next step within the screen flow. What I wanted to make sure is that we didn't leave the user on the previous screen, which would kind of leave you hanging on, do I click that button again or do I click next? So use the API available to move automatically to the next step, and that's why it landed on this upon the completion of the Omniscript. We'll go ahead and finish that, and at this point we have to define what particular networks within our plan that the physician participates in. So again, just going back to another step within inside of the stage, in this case then standard screen flow capabilities to select a couple of these networks, add the physician to those networks, and that's going to update details about the contract and the network participation. So we could go on to the next step. The next step is onboarding the physician, but it doesn't illustrate any uniqueness beyond what you've seen here. Doesn't add any additional integration with Omni Studio. The key spots of Omni Studio integration, of course, were the flex card, where we saw the summary of all the data that the physician had submitted, and then, of course, a more robust Omniscript when we step through the contract generation. So with that, I'll kind of leave us at this example, feel free to reach out to me, Dean Fischesser, with any questions about how this was integrated, how the Omni Studio components were embedded inside the Flow components. Thanks for your time.